Guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Abiola, and in today's tutorial we'll be taking the pattern drafting and sewing of the basic bodice. Okay, I would also show you how to take measurements needed to make a basic bodice. Okay, the materials required includes 2 to 3 yards of any fabric of choice depending on your size. I used calico, a practice fabric. You would need a matching thread and you would need your zipper. Those are the three major materials you'll be needing for the class. The first thing I did was to join two pattern papers together using my sellotape, and this is because one pattern paper won't be enough to get the length of basic bodice I plan to make. The next step is to mark out my starting line. I'm going to come down from the top by 1 inch. I would mark it at several points, then proceed to use my ruler to connect it to form a straight line. After which, I went ahead to label that line SH, which means shoulder line. The next step is to mark out all our vertical measurements, and I'm going to show you how to take those measurements. The first thing you want to do is to get a rope, okay, and try to locate your natural waistline. In order for you to locate your natural waistline, just tilt to the side. Okay, bend or tilt to the side. There will be a part that folds around your waist. Tie that rope or bias tape around that part. As you can see, I bent multiple times to be sure that I am tying that rope on my natural waistline. After tying that rope on your natural waistline, the next step is to get your tape rule, okay, and locate this part of your shoulder, okay, the part I'm showing you right now. From that part of my shoulder, I am going to take my shoulder to bust measurement, which is also known as the bust point. The trick is to try to feel your nipple point. So from your shoulder to your nipple point, that is your bust point. I sometimes use 10 inches as my bust point, and sometimes I use 11 inches, okay, and the value I get is mostly dependent on the type of bra I'm wearing when I'm taking my measurement. The next measurement is the front shoulder to waistline. Mine is 17.5 inches, okay. The front shoulder to waistline is always different from the back shoulder to waistline because of the presence of the breast in front and the absence of the breast at the back. So my back shoulder to waistline is 14.5 inches. I just take that measurement by measuring from my shoulder to the rope I tied on my natural waistline. The next measurement is the hip point. So I'm going to tie a rope on the widest part of my hip. Okay, so your hip point is from your waist to the widest part of your hip. So I'm going to measure from my waist to the widest part of my hip, and what I have is 10 inches. Okay, the first vertical measurement I am going to be marking is my bust point, which is my shoulder to bust. Okay, so mine is 10 inches. I'm going to mark it, and I'm going to mark it at several points to enable me get a straight line. After marking, I'm going to connect the point with my ruler and then proceed to label the point bust point. The next step is to mark out my front shoulder to waist, which is 17.5 inches, which is what I marked. I'll proceed to mark it at several points as well to enable me get a straight line. After marking the point, I'll go in with my ruler to connect the point to form a straight line, and I would label that line waist line. The next measurement I'll be marking is the hip point, and that is your waist to the widest part of your hip. Okay, I'll be using a standard hip point of 9 inches. Okay, this 9 inches works for almost everyone. Okay, but if you're not comfortable with using the standard measurement, I already showed you how to take that measurement. Okay, sometimes I use 10 inches, which is what I get whenever I measure my hip point, and sometimes I just go with the standard measurement, and they both work perfectly for me. So I'm going to go ahead now to mark that 9 inches at several points, then proceed to use my ruler to connect the point, and I would label that line hip line. The next measurement is your waist to knee measurement, and if you take a look at the screen, you will see how you can take that measurement. Mine is 23 inches. I am going to mark that 23 inches at several points, connect with my meter rule, and label that line knee line. Now let's work on our basic neckline. I'll be working with a standard measurement of 3 inches by 3 inches. That is, the neck depth will be 3 inches and the neck width will be 3 inches. But if you're on the bigger side, you can do 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So guys, the first thing I am going to mark from the center front area is my neck width, and my neck width is 3 inches. I am going to proceed to note that 3-inch point with my marker, after which I'll proceed to mark my neck depth, which is also 3 inches. I would note that point as well, and then try to get a square by marking that 3-inch at several points, after which I'll go in with my ruler to connect the points to form a square. This square will make it very easy for us to get our perfect round neck. Okay, so I'm going to label this part neck depth, that is our neck depth, and I'm also going to label the top part neck width. Okay, this is just for easy understanding. The next step is to draw out our round neck, and in order to do that, you would have to bring in your curve, and you're going to place it exactly as shown, one of the edge touching the neck width area and the other edge touching the neck depth area, and just use your marker or your pencil to connect the point just as shown. That is going to give you your perfect round neck. Okay, the next measurement we'll be taking is our shoulder width measurement, and if you look on the screen, you'll see how to take that measurement. Once you've taken your shoulder width measurement, the next step is to divide that measurement by 2. My own shoulder width measurement is 16. 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. So I'm going to go on the shoulder line, and on that line I am going to mark 8 inches just as shown. After marking your shoulder width divided by 2, the next step is to remember that our shoulder is not straight. When you take a look at your shoulders, you would realize that our shoulders are slant and not straight. Okay, and in order to account for the slant on our shoulders, we would have to come down from the shoulder point by 1.5 inches and mark. Some persons do 1 inch, but I have noticed from time that 1.5 inches works better, like it fits better. After coming down by 1.5 inch for our shoulder slope, the next step is to use your meter rule to connect from your neck width area to that shoulder slope just as shown. The next step is to work on our armhole. And in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is to calculate our armhole line. In order to calculate your armhole line, you would have to divide your bust circumference by 6 plus 1.5 inches. I'm going to quickly show you how to take your bust circumference measurement. Place your tape round the fullest part of your bust and ensure that you have one finger underneath the tape just as shown. This will ensure that the measurement you get is not too tight. Okay, just try to move the tape around a little bit just to ensure you're not getting a very tight measurement. Okay, so my bust circumference is 39, so let's use that to calculate our armhole line. Like I said, to calculate your armhole line, you have to divide your bust circumference by 6 plus 1.5 inches. 39 divided by 6 gives me 6.5 inches. Then 6.5 inches plus that 1.5 inches gives me 8. So my armhole line is 8 inches. So guys, do your own calculation, and whatever you get, you're going to mark it from the shoulder slope. Okay, mine is 8, so from the shoulder slope I'm going to mark 8 inches and note it with my marker. The next thing I would like to do is to rule out a straight line at that point, and in order for me to get a straight line, I'm going to measure from that 8 inches I marked to the shoulder line. I'm going to take it up just as shown, and you would note that I have 9.5 inches. Okay, so for me to get a straight line, I'm going to mark that 9.5 inches at several points. Okay, then connect the points to form a straight line. The next step is to measure what you have on this your shoulder line, that your shoulder width divided by 2 that you marked. Remember, mine was 16 divided by 2, and remember I marked 8. I would take that 8 inches and mark on the armhole line, and then proceed to connect the points just as shown with my ruler. The next step is to form our armhole curve, and there are 4 things we need to do to fully form the armhole curve. The first is to measure from our shoulder slope to the armhole line just as shown and locate the midpoint. You know what I have there is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and I'm going to use my marker to mark the midpoint, which is 4. The second step in the creation of the armhole curve is to go in at that midpoint by 0.5 inch, that is half inch. Okay, so I'm going to go in at that midpoint by half inch and I would mark. Let me quickly label the armhole line AHL so that we don't get confused. Okay, so AHL implies armhole line. Okay, now the third step in the creation of the armhole curve is to divide your bust circumference by 4. Okay, you know we divide our measurements by 4 because we have 4 parts of the body. Okay, the right and left side of the front, the right and left side of the back. And since we are drafting a quarter of the pattern, it is only right that we divide our measurement by 4. Just like I explained, I'm going to divide my bust circumference by 4. 39 divided by 4 gives me 9.75, which I am going to place my tape on the armhole line and mark. The fourth and the last step in the creation of the armhole curve is to bring in your curve and connect the point just as shown. I'm going to connect from the shoulder slope to that half inch we went in by, then finally complete the curve by connecting to that point where we marked our bust circumference divided by 4. And that's it. That's how you form your armhole curve. Very, very easy. Next, let's mark our darts. And you may be wondering, what are the importance of that? That help our clothes to fit the body contours better. Look at blouse A. It's very free. It has no darts at all. And look at blouse B with a bit of that at the back. You can see how it fits the body. Okay, now take a look at the basic bodice I made. You can see the waist that, you can see the bust that, and you can see how fitted it looks on my body. In order to mark your darts, you would need to take your nipple to nipple or your bust span measurement. And that is the distance from one nipple to the other nipple, and that's how you take the measurement on the screen. My own nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. So you're going to divide whatever you get by 2. Mine is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4, which I would mark on the waistline. I would also proceed to mark that same 4 inches on my bust point line, then go in with my ruler to connect both points. The next step is to mark out our dart intake, and I like to use different dart intake for different bust sizes. If your bust circumference is 35 inches and below, use 1 inch. If your bust circumference is between 36 inches to 44 inches, use 1.5 inch. And if your bust circumference is 45 inches and above, use 2 inches. The reason I use different dart intakes for the different bust sizes is so that bigger busts can have more space for their bust to sit in. Imagine I use the same dart intake for bust 35 and bust 45. It won't really make any sense because bust 45 we need more space for their bust to sit in. Okay, since my bust circumference is 39, I'll be using 1.5 inch. So I'm going to go back to the paper. I'm going to divide that 1.5 inch by 2. 1.5 inch divided by 2 is 0.75. I'm going to mark that 0.75 on both sides of the line. In order to avoid having pointed darts that look like this one, you're going to come down from the bust point by 1 inch and you're going to mark. Okay, then I'll proceed with my ruler to connect the dart legs just as shown. The next step is to divide your waist circumference by 4, and here is how to take that measurement. Just place your tape around the smallest part of your waist or your natural waistline, and do not forget to place a finger underneath so that your measurement is not too tight. Okay, mine is 30 inches. 30 divided by 4 gives me 7.5. So on the waistline I am going to mark that 7.5. Then I will measure what I marked as my dart. Okay, what I marked as my dart is 1.5 inches, so that is what I would measure, and I would also mark that. That is very important so that you do not get short of fabric. Okay, so after doing that, the next step is to divide my hip circumference by 4, and here is how to take that measurement. Just place your tape around the widest part of your hip, that is your hip point. Mine is 42 inches. 42 divided by 4 gives me 10.5. So on the hip line, I'll proceed to mark 10.5. Before connecting the point, we need to complete our waist dart. In order to do that, just go ahead to divide your nipple to nipple or your bust span by 2 and mark on your hip line. Remember, mine is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I'm going to mark the same thing here just to get a straight line. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now to connect the point with my ruler. Okay, and then the length of the dart from the waistline will be 6 inches, which I would mark, and I will proceed to connect the point just as shown, and that is how you form your waist dart. In order to create a straight dress and not a pencil dress, we would have to mark the same thing we marked on our hip line on our knee line. And remember, what we marked on our hip line is 10.5. Just pick that 10.5 and mark that same thing on the knee line, then proceed to connect the the point. I am going to use my ruler to connect from the armhole line to the waist just as shown, then bring in my curve to connect from the waistline to the hip line just as shown. And finally, I am going to proceed to use my ruler to connect from the hip line to the nail line just as shown. And this is your straight dress. Mind you, this is not a pencil dress. I'm going to show you how to get your pencil dress in a minute, okay? Depending on how pencil you want your dress to be, you can go in from that point by either 1, 2, or 3 inches. Do not go below 1, do not go above 3. If you go above 3, the dress will be too tight. I decided to use 2 inches, okay? So I'm going to go in from that point by 2 inches. Like I said, just pick a value between 1 to 3 inches. You can do 2.5, you can do 3, but do not go above 3, okay? So I'll proceed to connect with my ruler just as shown. And that is how we get our pencil dress, okay? In order to avoid getting pointy ears on the hip line of our skirt, I'm just going to use my curve to give this a natural curve, okay? We don't want that pointy ear. So just, do that. The next step is to draft out our back pattern, and from what I noticed, I elongated some of these lines more than I should have. So I'm going to use a strip of paper and a sellotape to cover up the lines so that I can continue drafting. If you made the same mistake as me, you can as well use your masking tape to cover up the lines, or just join a new pattern paper by the side, okay? Any of that would work. In order to draft out the back part, there are some lines from the front pattern we are going to maintain. One of them is the bust point line. I would also be maintaining the armhole line, so I'm going to label the armhole line. I would also extend my starting line and label the back pattern, okay, so that we can differentiate the back from the front. The next step is to proceed to mark out all the vertical measurement, okay? If you remember, our front shoulder to waist is different from the back shoulder to waist because of the presence of the breast in front. My back shoulder to waist is 14.5. So I'm going to proceed to mark that at several points, then use my meter rule to connect the points to form a straight line. And I would go ahead to label the line waistline. The next thing we need to mark is our hip point and our waist knee, just like the front, okay? My hip point is 9 inches. I'm going to mark it at several points, connect the point to my ruler, and label that point hip line. The next point I'll be marking is my waist knee, which is 23 inches. I'll mark that at several points as well, connect the point to my ruler, and label the knee line. After marking out all our vertical measurements, the next step is to work on our neckline. One important tip you must note at this point is the fact that you must use the same neck width that you used for your front pattern for your back pattern, and you may be wondering why, and that is because for the shoulders to align when you are joining, the neck width must be the same, okay? You can't use 4 in front and then use 3 at the back. Your shoulders will not align, okay? The neck width that I used in front is 3 inches, so I'm going to mark that same thing at the back. I am going to use my tape rule to mark 3 inches as my neck width at the back, and I'm going to label that point neck width, okay? When it comes to your neck depth at the back, it can vary. You don't have to use the same neck depth for the front as the back, okay? And the basic neck depth for the back is between 1 inch to 1.5 inches, okay? And this depends on how high you want your neckline to be at the back. I am going to be using 1 inch as my neck depth at the back, so I'm going to come down from the starting line by 1 inch. Then I would use my curve to connect the point just as shown. Note, it is the end of my curve that I'm using to make that connection, okay? So I'm going to connect just as shown. The next step is to mark out your shoulder width divided by 2, just like we did in front. My shoulder width is 16. 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. So I'm going to proceed now to mark that 8 inches. And as we did in front, our shoulder slope was 1.5 inches. So I'm going to come down from that 8-inch point by 1.5 inches, and I would mark, then connect with my ruler just as shown. The next step is to work on our back armhole curve, which is slightly different from the front armhole curve, okay? In order to do that, measure what you have on your shoulder line, which is 8 inches, okay? I'm going to transfer that 8 inches to my armhole line, and I would mark as well, okay? Then go in with your ruler to connect the points to form a straight line. The next step is to divide your bust circumference by 4. Mine is 39. 39 divided by 4 4 is 9.75. So I'm going to go ahead to mark that on the armhole line, okay? In order to fully form the armhole curve, just like we did in front, measure from your shoulder slope to the armhole line. What I have there is 8 inches. So note the midpoint, okay? 8 divided by 2 is 4, which I marked. If you take a look at the front armhole curve, you would notice we went in by ½ inch. We won't be doing that for the back, okay? That's one of the important differences to note. Just go in with your curve, just as shown, to connect the point. And that forms your back armhole curve. The next step is to mark our dart for the back. Same as the front, just divide your nipple to nipple or your bust span by 2. Mine is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I'm going to mark that 4 inches on the waistline. I would also mark the 4 inches on the bust point line, and I would mark it on the hip line as well, and I would connect the point with my ruler just as shown. The next step is to take in our dart, and I would like us to refer to the dart intake we used in front. If your bust circumference is 35 inches and below, use 1 inch. 36 to 44, use 1.5 inches. 45 and above, use 2 inches. My bust circumference is 39, which falls in between the 36 inches to 44 inch mark. So I'm going to be using 1.5 inches, just like I did for the front. Okay, so I'm going to divide that 1.5 inches into 2 equal parts, okay, which gave me 0.75. So I'll mark 0.75 on both sides of the line, and I'm going to connect just as shown, okay? Now the length of the dart from the waistline will be 6 inches. So I'm going to measure 6 inches from the waistline, and I would mark, then connect just as shown. And that's how you form your back dart, okay? The next step is to mark out all the horizontal measurements. My waist circumference is 30. 30 divided by 4 is 7.5, which I marked. Then I'll go ahead to measure out what I marked for my dart, which is 1.5. I would mark that at this point, very important, okay? My hip circumference is 42. 42 divided by 4 is 10.5, which I marked as well. And finally, just as we did for the front, I would measure exactly what I marked on my hip line, which is 10.5 inches. I would mark that same thing on the knee line, and I'll proceed to connect all the points just as shown. I would connect from the armhole line to my waistline using my ruler. Then I would use my curve to connect from the waistline to the hip line just as shown. And I would complete everything with my ruler from the hip line to the knee line, okay? And this is your straight dress. And if you remember what we did for the front, to get our pencil dress, I told you can go in between 1 to 3 inches, okay? And if you remember, I did 2 inches, so I went in from the edge by 2 inches, and I connected with my ruler just as shown. Note that whatever you did for the front, if you went in by 2 inches in front, you have to do the same thing for the back. In order to avoid pointy ears, I'll go in with my curve and then blend this part into a nice curve, just like we did for the front, okay? The next step is to get rid of zipper bulge, and there are two things I do to totally get rid of zipper bulge. When you do these two things, when you carry out 2 steps, you should get rid of zipper bulge totally. Okay, the first thing is to remember what we used for our dart intake. I used 1.5 inches for my dart intake, so that is what I'm going to be using here. So note your waistline just as shown, okay? Then I am going to divide my dart intake into 2. 1.5 divided by 2 is 0.75, okay? I am going to mark 0.75 below and 0.75 at the top. Just see it as though you are taking another dart on the waistline, okay? This is another dart intake basically. So I am going to mark 0.75 below, and I'm also going to mark it at the top. And I would go in with my ruler to connect the points just as shown. Now, that is just the first step to getting rid of zipper bulge. The second step is to measure your dart intake again and divide whatever you get by 2. Mine is 1.5. 1.5 divided by 2 gives me 0.75, okay? So from the waistline, I am going to go in by that 0.75, and I would mark it. Okay, after that I would go in with my ruler to draw out a straight line that touches both lines. Then I will come in with my tape rule and measure 6 inches from the waistline and mark. The next step is to bring in your ruler and connect from your first dart leg to the neckline just as shown. The next step is to bring in your French curve and connect just as shown from the second dart leg to that 6 inches that we went down by. Aside from helping us get rid of zipper ball, this also helps us to shape our back. You know, our back is not straight, it's a slant, so this helps us to put in that slant. Okay, the next step is to contour our bum or shape our bum, and the first thing I'm going to do is to come down from the hip line by 1.5 inches. I'm going to mark that 1.5 inches at several points, then go in with my ruler to connect the points just as shown. Now when you want to contour your bum, you are going to go on the knee line and go in by 1 inch or 1.5 inches on the knee line. I did 1 inch, you can do 1.5 inches. Let me just show you how the back looks like for me. This step will help shape your bum just as shown with the arrow on the screen. So I am going to go in from the knee line by 1 inch. Like I said, you can do 1.5, but do not go above 1.5. And I'm going to come in with my ruler to connect from the knee line to that 1.5 inch point just as shown. The next step in the contouring of the bum is to bring in your French curve and blend in the curve just as shown. This is going to ensure that your bum is well contoured and well shaped. Okay, the next step is to mark our bust dart, and in order to do that, I'm going to measure my shoulder to waist for the back. If you remember, it is 14.5 inches, and measure my shoulder to waist for the front, which is 17.5 inches. Since my front shoulder to waist is 17.5 and my back shoulder to waist is 14.5, in order to get my bust dart, I have to subtract that 14.5 from that 17.5, and that gives me 3 inches. 3 inches is going to be my bust dart. In order to mark your bust dart, locate your bust point line on your front pattern, then bring in your tape rule and place it underneath the bust point line just as shown. And whatever you got as a difference between your front and back shoulder to waist, remember mine is 3 inches, which I would mark. You mark it. Okay, if yours is 2, you mark it. If yours is 2.5, you mark it. You can even get 1.5. Okay, to avoid getting pointy darts, come out from your bust point by 1 inch and mark. Okay, then proceed to go in with your ruler to connect from that 1 inch to the 3 inch I marked on the side. Okay, and that is how you mark your bust dart. Okay, to finally complete our bust dart, you would need to go in with your scissors and slash through the midpoint of this paper up to the waistline, after which go ahead to fold in your bust dart just as shown and try to match it up with the bust point line. After matching it up, you would notice that the dart line and the armhole line do not meet, they do not align. So you will come in with your ruler to try to connect that dart line to the armhole line just as shown. While still holding everything in place, go in with your scissors and cut through the armhole just as shown. And when you get to the bust point line, ensure the fold behind relaxes very well. Use your hand to press it well so you can get a crease. That crease will help you locate the midpoint of your bust dart. I am going to go in with my scissors and cut through to the waistline before I open it up to reveal how the bust dart now looks. This is what you should have. Okay, the next step is to locate the crease that was formed, then go in with your ruler to draw out a line at that point which shows the midpoint of your bust dart. Before I finish cutting out my pattern, I decided to add to the length of this dress. Remember, we stopped at the knee line and I want the dress to be a little longer, so I am going to go to the knee line and add 7 inches extra to the length. So on the knee line, I marked 7 inches at several points, then I went ahead to use my ruler to connect the points to form a straight line. If you are making a straight dress, just measure what you have on your straight dress line, which is 10.5, mark it out and connect the point. If you want a pencil dress, just go in by what you went in by at the top. I did 2 inches, so I'm going to connect that to form my pencil dress. Okay, then the same thing we did in front we'll do at the back. I'm going to add that 7 inches extra to the nail line for the back as well, and connect the point with my ruler. If I was making a straight dress, I'm going to measure what I have on the straight dress line, which is 10.5. I would mark that as well, connect with my ruler to form a straight line. Then since I also did a pencil dress, I would go in by 2 inches from that straight dress line and I would mark. Okay, then connect with my ruler to form my pencil dress. Now remember, we did our butt contour at the back and I went in by 1 inch. I will transfer that marking to this point, mark that 1 inch, use my ruler to connect the point. Okay, and that is it basically, guys. I am going to go ahead to label the dress length line for the back, and I would label the dress length line for the front. Okay, so that we do not confuse anything here. The next step is to completely cut out our front pattern just as shown, and I'll be making a pencil dress, so I'm cutting through the pencil dress line. Okay, if you were making a straight dress, you can cut through the straight dress line. All right, so I'm going to cut away the shoulder and also cut out the neckline, and this is our front pattern. On the front pattern, I am going to label the center front and the side front. Okay, and we are going to be cutting this on fold. All right, I'm going to label this front bodice pattern. The next step is to close the waist that we took at the back, and in order to do that, go in with your scissors on the waistline and slash through just as shown, after which you would need to go in with your scissors again and cut the dart legs away. Okay, I'm just going to slash this through. Okay, then cut it off, slash the other dart leg through and also cut it off. Okay, so we're going to have an opening at that point that we are going to close, just like you're closing the dart. I'm going to bring in my sellotape and close the darts together. Okay, what I would just do is align the both of them, then use my sellotape to hold them in place. After carrying out this step, you would notice that the upper dart is slant. Okay, so you have to bring in your ruler and straighten the dart. Okay, the dart below the waistline is straight, but the one above is slant, so you will use this dart below the waistline to straighten the one above the waistline. Just connect it just as shown, and just connect your dart legs again, and that's just it, guys. We are done with the back pattern, so I'm going to proceed now to cut out the back pattern. And just like I mentioned before, I'm going to be working with the pencil part of this dress. Okay, and at the back too, I'm going to cut off this butt contour, so carefully cut it out exactly as I'm cutting mine out. I'll cut off the neckline, cut off the back slant, and I would finally cut off the shoulder. Okay, so this is our back pattern basically, guys. If you fold in your bust dart, you would notice that we basically have a space for our bust to sit in. Can you see that space that forms when you fold in your bust dart? At this point, I would have to stop here because this video has gotten too lengthy. In our next class, I'm going to show you how to add all the necessary allowances, your side seam allowance and your zipper allowance. I would also show you how to cut out your patterns on your fabric and how to join all the pieces together to form a dress like this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.